in the last section in the last section we have discussed about the competitors and the business ethics, issues related to business ethics, where we saw like when we are talking of intelligence gathering and industrial espionage, or the dirty tricks played by the organizations in order to gain in the more information about the competitors present, and so that it gets overall control over the market space, and some anti-competitive behaviors like taken. So these becomes relevant also in case of while we are discussing about globalization, the suppliers and competitors. Like if we revisit the concept again in with respect to globalization in this module, when we are talking of the gathering of intelligence or industrial espionage, so the it becomes an unethical practice. It becomes an unethical practice when we are trying to deal with like how they are collecting the information, the techniques taken to the tactics taken to collect the information from the competitive organization, what type of information that they are trying to collect. Is that information private to the competitor, and the purpose for what they are putting that information to, which is against the maybe public interest. So here we will focus with relevance to globalization more into the issues and try to debate about whether any information can be stated as a private information for the particular organization, because now in the context of globalizations, and so the organizations due to this deterritorialization, the organizations are functioning like boundaryless organizations, where everybody is having access to more or less, and everybody gets to know what the organization is doing or not doing. So they and there is a very few like type of demarcation regarding what is private, define the private corporate space with respect to the public corporate space, like what is public and what is private. And here in context of globalization, the organization is dealing with multiple people, maybe at a single point of time, like when it is spreading itself across the different territories and regions through different cultures, then is it possible to have like ownership of this, as how to control it becomes really very difficult to how to control this information, so that how to put a check on people so that the information is not misused by the multiple of the users or individuals whom I am doing business with. So how do I put a control to these factors? These questions become relevant when we are discussing this with respect to globalization. Next important issue over here, when we are talking of the organizations like private information setup. So much of the corporates activities now take place in the like sort of public and semi-public places, like um, colleges, hospitals, then shops. So, is it possible for it to tell, like the with lots of infrastructure developed and the internet developed, technology developed? So, can it be claimed like how legitimate it is to claim like this is my private information? And this, like when it becomes so it's functioning in a public and space, or which is easily accessible, easily connected, then it is also it's also easy to track it. It is also easy to follow it. So how do I safeguard something which is which I'll like to preserve maybe as a part of my private information, which I may not be um, wanting to share it with others. So in this domain, maybe the discussion of intellectual property becomes important, because this is where we speak of the property rights of the organization. So what is the tacit knowledge gain and the thought processes, research is done to develop a product or services, or the how do I want to um, put my wisdom into it. This becomes important when you're talking of, like in case of inventions, your formulations. So these can be assigned to these intangible forms of your intangible forms of property. We can talk of this intellectual property rights. So, and any issues related to the violation of these things are taken as to be violation into the private informations. Any issues related to taking away these property rights from the organizations are taken as violations of the private information, the intellectual capital that the organization has. When we are talking also in the context of globalization about the purpose for which this information is collected. So, if the purpose is for the information collected could be for maybe providing some harm to the greater interest of the public. Suppose if some organizations are, because in the globalization context, the organizations have got it's and this like private people coming, private companies coming in for even and trying to answer to the getting into the areas like defense and maybe security, producing things for the militaries and all these type of things. So any information which is gathered from the these type of organizations, and maybe it is shared with other competitive organizations through the processes of like espionage, spies, etc., which may have a larger negative impact on the welfare of the organism, of the maybe the country at large, the citizens at large, are questionable practices. Because and if these things are done for the sake of the profit that is gained in terms of, like, I sell this information to others, and that gives me a lot of margin of profit, then these becomes in questions of ethical questions, because these are against going against the public interest at large. So generally these public interest things are like explained basis on the consequentialist framework, like whether if the outcome is positive or negative, but the very process itself, like it is getting the way the techniques used to collect these informations and the purpose for what it is used for, both the things will determine whether it is an ethical or unethical in nature. So and also these are related to that we discussed about the overly aggressive competitions, and how maybe the MNC is trying to spread itself across different organizations, across different countries to gain its businesses. And this, in this context also, we can talk of the gifts and bribes, the techniques taken for gifts and bribes, and how it gets interpreted across different cultures, the difference in interpretation, and the loophole that we may discover and do our business in that gray area, because these also talks of the techniques taken for moving in the way which are, as we discussed, anti-competitive motives. So we are trying to pressurize the suppliers, or we are trying to, because of the monetary power that we are having, we are trying to gain access to space or infrastructure, and trying to provide certain restrictions to it, so that other competitors are not able to enter into the zone. So we are trying to, as if, gain a monopoly and provide restrictions for the entry of the other organizations. So this we will try to discuss again when we will be discussing globalization with respect to how it deals with the local competitions. When we are talking of issues that we discussed in the last module, that of exercising its dominant position, and that forcing others, coercing others to enter into the contract with the organization, so that jointly, though the organization by itself is not efficient or self-sufficient enough to answer to the competition of the other organization, which is maybe it's a very near competition, giving a very close competition to it, that by using its dominant position, what it is doing, it is buying of other businesses who have similar complementary products, and that's how gaining strength and putting a great challenge to the competitors. So these type of use of dominant positions, or the use of, when you're talking of forming cartels, so that the local competitors cannot withstand that pressure. So joining of hands of few like-minded competitors, so that the common competitor, which could be a local competitor or a group of local competitors, cannot withstand that pressure. These type of challenges are also there when we are talking in terms of globalization, suppliers and competitors. So let us see what are the issues that we face in this context. So these ethical challenges of global business networks are reshaping. It actually deals with reshaping of ethical consideration with suppliers and competitors. It by bringing in issues of different ways of doing business, impacts on indigenous business that we were discussing, differing labor and environmental standards across different regions, and extended chain of responsibility. Different ways of doing a business. So here we are mainly talking of the questionable tactics like gifts and bribes, and which shows bribe paying for multinational companies according to the country of origin. So, so what we find, like in a study done by the 2008 bribe payers index, which is available at www.transparency.org, we find like where there is a, it is a 0 to 10 scale, where there is a perfect score indicating no perceived propensity to pay bribes is 10. So those countries in which resides with headquarter in those countries, with those companies headquarter in those countries with a lower score, have a higher perceived propensity to bribe. So what this actually shows is that it depends on the host country's culture, based on the country of the origin of the organization, maybe, which determines whether I will take a shortcut in doing my business or not, whether I pay a bribe for doing my business or not. And that depends on my understanding of like what I understand by bribe and gift, and the whichever low score on have low score on this scale have a higher propensity to pay the bribe. And in the study again, based on this 2008 bribe payers index, it shows like in which it talks of the different sectors where bribes are paid, which talks of like 0 for the sector, score of 0 for the sector which bribes are always paid, and 10 that bribes are never paid by a sector. And we find in many cases that either the 0 point or the 10 point, it is not somewhere appearing in the list. So we cannot just tell like bribes are never paid and bribes are always paid, sort of, but it becomes apparent from the study like more or less in some situations bribes are paid. And it depends again on the country's perspective of interpretation of what is bribe and what is gift. As we discussed in the earlier discussion, what is the intention of giving the bribe will also depend on the decision making power of the individual to whom the bribe is paid for the particular the gift is given for the particular decision at hand, the conflict of interest faced by that particular person regarding in whose best interest I am working, or is the amount persuasive enough to just make that person decide on like to move that person in the way of deciding something which goes against the interest of the organization and serves his self-interest of getting the money, and decide for the organization like as a supplier, so that without taking into consideration the chances given to other similar type of suppliers, and like forces like somewhere the amount given is so much that it persuades the person to take preferential treatment to the supplier. These type of issues, analysis of these type of things will determine the nature of the things that are given, whether it comes to gift or whether it becomes a bribe, and for like the personal interest taken, and whether it is within the acceptable or not acceptable definition of the culture in which the business scenario is happening are very important. Next, we are going to discuss the impacts on indigenous businesses. So, in the last discussion also, when we are trying to discuss about the anti-competitive behavior, or when you're talking of the issues like using one's dominant positions or forming of cartels and collusions for the bigger organizations to give prove a barrier to the competitors. So this also is relevant when we are talking with respect to impacts on indigenous businesses. What we see, like the size, power, and the political influence of the MNCs often means that they enjoy considerable cost and other advantages as compared to local competitors because of their strength, because of their maybe powers of corporate citizenship. They have a considerable influence on the other stakeholders of the developing countries where they have come to do the business, more so with respect to government regulations and relaxations given to them. And so because they come to the country and they enter into a relationship with the region in terms of like bringing upliftment of the economic development of the country, developing country. So in that case they enjoy, and if they are more powerful in terms of the powers, relative powers shared, they the advantages given to them and compared to the local competitors, they are in more some cases more than the powers shared by the local competitors. They offer like employment alternatives to people who would have otherwise maybe start their own business. So this can be looked maybe both from a positive aspect and a negative aspect of like cutting down competition. So if the MNC was not there, probably there was some seed of thought in some person's mind with the small sort of infrastructure available to them that would have given them possibility of starting their own businesses and thus create employment opportunities for a larger set of people in the local area. But with the MNCs coming in as a with greater power and infrastructure, they provide employment alternatives to those people, and instead of starting up with their own businesses, they are more attracted towards get themselves employed, and thus the seed of doing a business which could have been there in this mind that doesn't get the scope of flourishing. So this could be having both, like by the providing employment, maybe we are uplifting the living standards of the person, but on the other way, with the possibility of business, when it gets doesn't see the light of the day, then maybe the employment opportunities of so many other people also comes to a question mark, and there lies the negative impact of it. So, and exposure to the competition of a major multinational can severely threaten the business of indigenous competitors. So this we were discussing in the last module when we were talking of the bottom of the pyramid opportunities, where the MNCs, through their powers, through their controls like that they have, through the resources that they have access to, may produce things at a very large scale at a lower cost than what the indigenous competitors are producing, and can provide the alternatives to the people at the bottom of the pyramid also. But it may act as a threat to the indigenous competitors. Maybe in this case, if you take case of a, maybe if you are taking in this case, maybe if you are taking the case of a local bakery who was producing maybe breads and biscuits and all, and selling it within that small framework of this within its small area ambit, then coming of an MNCs and entering into that market space in terms of selling the breads or the biscuits and all these type of bakery items for small prices also. So could have like bring the local competitors, the indigenous competitors, to big threat of survival, and that they may need a caring aspect. They either they need to be like integrated with the business of the main MNC and all, or otherwise their existence becomes a threat. So this exposure to come because they are not able to face the challenge posed by the MNCs. We also discussed about we also discussed about the differing labor and environmental standards that appear in different regions where the organizations are functioning, and they are in some cases maybe the environmental standards are strictly followed, labor standards are strictly followed. In some countries maybe it is not there, it is ambiguous, it is not stated. So it may so happen like those countries where the laws are relaxed, regulations are not present, that becomes an important rush place, more attractive ways where you get your suppliers from, because that could be the case in terms of when you are talking of suppliers and ethical responsibilities in the scenario of your suppliers perspective for globalization. So what happens, like maybe there is a rush to those countries, developing countries, where there is no such clear rules and regulations given. Even if it is stated, the implementation of those rules and regulations are not strictly followed, and that's why they can give a supply at a very lower cost, which adds to the competitive advantage of the profit margin that the MNC is doing by producing at a very low cost in some of these developing countries, and maybe selling at a very high price in some different country, because there is no restriction of it. It is not compulsory, like where you are producing, your things are getting sold in that country only. So that can, this differing labor and environmental standards could be an issue regarding where do you source your supply from in case of like globalization and business ethics. So this brings to the our questions regarding the what is the responsibility of the MNC with respect to that. So if you're looking from the cost benefit analysis, maybe like we can argue like going to a developed country, a developing country, and doing a business over there, creating job opportunities in that country. So we are uplifting their standard of life, because there is a difference in the condition from not having anything to having something. So that is the and then why do we need to take care more about the ethical issues related to the processes? Why do we intervene in that, whether the laws and regulations are present or not present, and whether we need to follow it strictly or not? Because maybe in the when you're doing a cost benefit analysis in terms of what is the cost of this activity and what is the benefit gained by this the people, local people or society, then maybe they were not having anything and now they are having at least something. So having at least something is better than not having anything. So this could be the argument. But when we understand like we are in a network of relationship, and it is relationship like of where because there is an information asymmetry, because we are the MNCs are more powerful as compared to their suppliers or the other competitors, the local people over there. So maybe there is an information asymmetry in the power that is shared by each other, and it becomes somewhat a responsibility of the this is from the caring perspective, like due to that factor, and because there is a social cost of doing a business in a developing country, because it is getting produced there and maybe it is getting sold somewhere else. The burden of the running the business is taken by someone, but the fruit of that business, the gain from that business, ultimate gain, is they do not have a share to that. Due to that social cost effects, it becomes an extended chain of responsibility of the MNCs to take care not only of the suppliers, for the education of the suppliers, to see like they are following due care processes in their organizations, due care in dealing not only in how they are producing the things and whether they are trying to see it, the check with the standards at every step of the producing the things, but due care with respect to how they are procuring from their suppliers. And that's how the extended chain of responsibility of a particular firm gets connected to the like the gets extended to the supplier of suppliers also. So, and because the MNC is powerful, so it can like have its power exerted on the supplier or the organization or government in that particular region to take care of the exploitation issues, proper working conditions, proper payment of salary, the discrimination issues, and so many issues of child labor, environmental concerns, so many other things which, and how to produce in a more ethical way goods and services. So these becomes a part of the extended chain of responsibility towards the supplier of suppliers. If you are talking of extended chain of responsibility towards the indigenous businesses, then what do we have a responsibility towards them? Do we provide them some space, opportunities to get integrated with our supply chain or not? So these types of alternatives could be thought about, so that and the MNCs are doing business in an ethical way in the developing countries that they have um, taken as the suppliers for their products or services. So what extended responsibility do they have towards these indigenous competitors also? So these type of questions are taken under this extended chain of responsibility, and both for the case of, like when you're talking of the suppliers of suppliers, and in terms of suppliers and the competitors, like what we're trying to see, or do we pay gifts and bribes to the techniques that we take, so that we can we will influence the sellers to showcase our products in a preferable position on the shelves as compared to the indigenous competitors, so that the people, the buyers, the consumers do not have even a view of the indigenous goods. So these type of maybe small considerations will show the extended responsibility towards the competitors, and specifically the indigenous businesses, and whether we integrate them also as a part of our business is one of the bigger considerations. In the so this discussion is connected to this ethical ways, or the extended part of responsibility, when we are discussing about the organizations, MNCs, with respect to the other suppliers and the suppliers of suppliers, and to the indigenous competitors. We are also discussing to some extent the political role of the organization as a corporate citizen, and so the power it can exercise as a corporate citizen and in the business community, and with the exercise of this, so that it gives rise to a balanced network of the different stakeholders, what power the corporate can exercise in terms of corporate citizenship in towards its towards these suppliers and to the competitors, and what is done so that a balance is maintained. We'll discuss in the next module, when we will be discussing two things, which is ethical sourcing and fair trade. Thank you.